So, Sally, are we good to go?
Yeah, we're good to go, Martin.
Right. Yeah. Right. A very good evening to everyone, to all of the Sligo Field Club members, and a special word of welcome to all the new people who might be tuning in for this interesting lecture. As I told you the last night, we had intended to have a lecture in and around the signing of the treaty, which the centenary occurred just last week, I think on the 6th of December. We were unable to get a lecturer for that event. In fact, we were let down by somebody, which shuffled things on us greatly. And I happened to bump into Frank Fagan, and I mentioned it. And Frank said, sure, I'll do a lecture for you. So Frank, my apologies in that I didn't think about you earlier. But he said he'd a lecture ready to go. So Frank, we're delighted to have you, and you're very, very welcome. And the title of Frank's lecture is The Culleens Ambush, which happened during the War of Independence. And of course, the signing of the treaty, we might say, brought the War of Independence to an end. And of course, it was quickly followed by the Civil War. So it's an interesting period in our history, and a part of our history we haven't touched on in recent years anyway. And it is the centenary. We're still in 1921, and we were not going to let the year go by without a reference to 1921. And Frank is going to fill the slot for us. So who is Frank? Frank is originally from Dublin, and he's now living in West Sligo. And through his work as a volunteer in the Jackie Clarke Collection in Ballina, and that is a private collection of Irish historical memorabilia, rare books and artifacts, which were bequeathed to the town of Ballina. He has become fascinated by the extraordinary local stories and experiences from the War of Independence, and particularly the Civil War, which have been shared with him by the elderly sons and daughters of the men and women who fought. As the practicing psychotherapist and a former tutor with the National University of Ireland, he has a particular interest in the legacy and aftermath of conflict in a small rural area. Frank was invited to speak to an audience of American psychotherapists in Trinity College at a conference organized by the University of Holy Cross, New Orleans in August 2018. His presentation was entitled Living with History: Remembering and Not Remembering Trauma in the West of Ireland, where he had an opportunity to share some of the stories he had listened to in the small kitchens and farmhouses throughout West Sligo and North Mayo. He is currently an MA student in UCC, writing his thesis on events in Sligo and Mayo in the summer of 1922. So, Frank, a very good evening to you. We're delighted to have you. We're looking forward to your lecture. So, guests, sit back and relax, and I'll hand over to Frank. Frank, it's all yours.
Thanks very much, Martin. Thank you. Okay, so tonight I'm going to speak about the Culleens Ambush, and I became interested in this ambush because people didn't want to speak to me about it. I live in Enniscrone, and I had heard some small details of what had happened, but didn't really know the full story. And it was only when I read an account of the ambush in Ernie O'Malley's book, The Mayo Interviews, that I really became interested in what had actually happened. As Martin said, in my work as a volunteer with the Jackie Clarke Collection, I have a particular interest in meeting the family members of those who participated or witnessed events during the War of Independence and the Civil War. I also have an interest in how these events are remembered, or in some cases not remembered, not spoken about, never discussed. And I like this quote from Margaret Atwood. Time is not a line, but a dimension, like the dimensions of space. I began to think of time as having a shape, something you could see, like a series of liquid transparencies, one laid on top of the other. You don't look back a long time, but down through it, like water. Sometimes this comes to the surface, sometimes that, sometimes nothing. Nothing goes away. So even if we don't discuss, if we don't talk about those events, they don't go away. Okay, so I just need to declare my interest in this particular period in history has to do with both of my grandfathers were volunteers. This is my mother's father, Gerald Toole, and he was a Republican prisoner during the Civil War. He was captured by Free State forces and he was held in Carlow Jail, Wicklow Jail, and the Curragh. He died when I was 16. My other grandfather, Thomas Fagan, was a member of the Dublin Brigade. He joined the IRA in 1917 and he was involved in a lot of activities in Dublin. He was one of the men who attacked the Custom House in 1921. He was dead before I was born, but my grandfathers never met, but they had one thing in common. They rarely, if ever, spoke about their experiences of this period. Okay, so in my work as a volunteer in the Jackie Clarke Collection, I was giving a course to local people who were interested in the military archives, and I wanted to show them how to use the military archives website and the pension applications that are now available online to view. So these are pension applications that would have been submitted in the 1920s and the 1930s. So I came across a case in Kilchermock, and I felt that it was a perfect case study to use for the people who were interested, because I could show them how you bring the stories together. And so it was to do with an incident on the main street in Kilchermock, and it happened on the day following the shelling of the forecourts in Dublin. So here we have the Ruan brothers, who had both joined the Free State Army, and they were in their family's pub and shop, and it was a fair day. And a local group of IRA men came into the pub and shop to arrest the two Ruan brothers because they had been recruiting for the Free State Army. Within seconds, guns were drawn and the situation escalated, and two men were killed and one man was badly wounded. So the two Ruan, one of the Ruan brothers was shot, mortally wounded. He died 5 days later. One of the Republicans was shot and he died instantly. And Jim Ruan was very badly wounded but survived. So I went back to the museum and I was telling the girls, the ladies who worked there, about this incident that I had discovered. And they asked me what the name of the people were. So I said Ruan. So they told me about a fire that had happened in the same building. So 22 years after, in May 1944, in the same pub and shop where the shooting had taken place, there was a mysterious fire in the middle of the night and 8 people died in it. Okay. So amongst the dead were James Ruan, who had been wounded 22 years earlier, his wife Mary, his 3 children aged 5, 6, and 7, and 3 of his employees as well. So 2-year-old Patrick Ruan was saved by his aunt Margaret Bourne. She threw him from an upstairs window and he was caught by a bystander. She then jumped out of the window, and she was very badly injured after the incident. So my first question to my colleagues in the museum was, is the baby still alive? And Pat Ruane was alive, and I contacted his wife and I asked her if Pat would like to speak to me about what he knew and what he had been told about that incident in 1922. So I went out with my colleague Sinead, and we spent 2.5 hours in the kitchen with Pat, speaking to him and hearing what he had to say about his family connections to both events. And the last thing that I did before I left, I took a camera from my bag and I took a photograph of Pat. And that's him sitting in his kitchen, and he is holding the medal that his father got for action in Mayo in 1916. Interviewing Pat really had quite an effect on me. I just thought this is as close as you get to speaking to the people who are actually involved in the events. I printed off this photograph and I framed it, mounted it, and I dropped it back out to his house a week later. And 4 weeks later, his daughter contacted me to tell me that he had died and that he had never spoken about most of those things before until the day myself and my colleague had called in to see him. And she also said that he really liked the photograph and that that was the photograph that was on his coffin in the funeral home. So when I get an opportunity to visit somebody and to speak to them about these events, time is of the essence, okay? So the other thing that really struck me about this, I went to visit the site of the fire, and this was 74 years after it had happened. And it looked like it had been the day before. And this is on the main street in Kilchimock, okay? So that's the back wall of the house there. That's from behind. And I spoke to a number of locals and they knew nothing of what had happened there. They knew nothing of the fire. They knew nothing of actually the 10 people who had died there. And there was no plaque either. Now, this is a man that I visited recently in Sligo town. His name is Plunket Doherty, and I was speaking to him earlier today, and he gave me permission to use this photograph. So the photograph that he is holding is 99 years old, and this is a close-up of the photograph. So that's his father at the back there. That's Harry Doherty, and this photograph is incredible. So his uncle had this photograph in England. The photographs from the Civil War are very, very rare. So his uncle had this photograph in England for all his working life, and he had it hidden because he felt it was dangerous for him to be in possession of this. The other remarkable thing about this photograph is that that's Brian McNeill, who was killed on Benbulben in 1922. So it's very, very, it's quite a privilege to meet somebody like Plunket and to be able to spend time with him and listen to the stories that he was able to tell me about his father's life. Okay, so now coming back to the Culleens Ambush. So for this presentation, I've used a number of different sources. Okay, so I did an essay on the ambush, and it's available on, if you just Google the Culleens Ambush Jackie Clarke Collection, you'll be able to get access to the entire essay. It's about 10,000 words or something, but it's very detailed. Okay, so the essay begins 97 years after the event and works back to the events of that day. Okay, so hopefully you will get an understanding of how events unfolded and how over the course of time, the memory of that day was preserved by a small number of families who were directly impacted. Okay, so the days following the ambush, it was widely reported in local newspapers and the national newspapers as well. The Irish Times, this is from the Irish Times, and the report in the Irish Times was actually pretty close to what I had discovered had actually happened. Okay, so what did happen? So we now know that upwards of 30 men were involved in setting up the ambush. 2 from the group carried out an armed robbery on the pub and shop in order to draw the RIC out of the barracks in Dromore West. Once the owner's son leaves to report the robbery, a deadly trap is set and the unit divide into 2 groups to prevent escape. The plan was that the firing would only start when the lead members of the patrol arrived at the pub and shop. So after waiting for quite a while, the ambush parties were about to abort the plan when in the distance they could see the first of the patrol appear. In the words of Matt Kilcawley, who was second in command that day, "We waited, we lay low, and they came in as the Angelus rung." So the RO7 arrived in extended formation. The firing started when the first 2 came to the shop. The entire building and yard had been taken over by the IRA. The RIC men got off their bikes and jumped into the ditch, pouring fire, but they were completely overwhelmed and surrendered shortly after. The remainder of the patrol escaped. One of them was badly wounded and left where he fell on the road. So in the middle of the ambush scene, a car drove through on its way towards Sligo. One of the RIC men jumped onto it and within a very short time, he managed to alert the British military and the RIC to what was happening. So the volunteers now headed for a burying close to the road with their 2 prisoners, their bikes and weapons. The group had not travelled far when they came under fire from a long distance. Thus began a frantic chase as the men tried to get back to their base in the mountains. With the arrival of further reinforcements, which were visible in the distance, the volunteers took the decision to kill both of the RIC men. Okay, and what's important here as well is that they told them that they were going to kill them. Another important aspect to all of this is that there were hundreds of people cutting turf on the bog as this was happening. Men, women, and children witnessed all of these events. A running gun battle ensued until dusk that evening. The volunteers knew every inch of the bogs and mountains, and it was this that saved them. The 2 groups made it to the safety of their dugouts near to Ballina, and there were no casualties on the IRA side. Okay, so there's the map of Sligo. We have West Sligo there. So here we have the Dromore West RIC barracks. So it's on the main road from Ballina to Sligo. And this is where the ambush happened. Okay, so there's some of the IRA group they were on high ground, so they could see for a good distance and they could see the bikes coming over the hill. So this is where the reinforcements came from the RIC barracks in Eastkey. Okay, now, so everybody knows the man on the right here, but the man on the left is Martin John Dolphin. Okay, and this was in May of 2018 that Martin John Dolphin brought us to the spot where the 2 RIC men were shot dead. Martin's father was 8 years of age on the day of the ambush, and he witnessed the events. So Martin is standing beside, this is something else now that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. So the spot where the 2 RIC men were shot and where their bodies lay, there's a 6-foot square of turf here that has not been cut for almost a century. And on top of that, there's a plaque that was put there about 20 years ago. So for 80 years, there was no plaque there. And it was like a fairy ring or something. So it's like 1.5 meters higher than the rest of the bog. So you can see it there behind Martin John as well, just to give you an idea of how high it is, okay? And there in the foreground as well, this is where the 2 bodies lay. So Martin John was explaining there that on the day, his father told him that when the bodies were discovered, the British forces opened fire and they killed ponies and donkeys that the local people were using to draw the turf. Martin John was also explaining to us that the IRA men were trying to get, there's a gap in the mountain that they were trying to get through to get back to safety. Okay, so this is from the brigade activity report, and this information has only become available in about the last 5 or 6 years. So in each area, there was a committee set up of IRA men, and in order for people to qualify for the pension, they had to be on a list, you know, so it had to say what actions they were involved in, what they did, and you know, how many people were involved in each of the actions. So when we look at this one with the Culleens Ambush, now they have the date wrong, but this would have been submitted in the early 1930s, probably about 33 or 34. So what we can see now for the first time is that it has a list of all the men that were involved, okay, in various outposts. There were 70 men involved in the Culleens Ambush. Now, I was saying to you earlier, this is the most detailed account given of the Culleens Ambush. And this is the men will talk to me, the Mayo interviews with Ernie O'Malley. So Nat Kilcawley was interviewed in November 1951. And this is what he says about the Culleens Ambush. We had the 2 RIC prisoners with us. One of them was King, who had led the RIC and the auxiliaries, okay, on previous raids. When we were being fired on, we asked what we could do with the prisoners. So we had a short council of war and we decided to shoot them. We gave them a short few seconds in which to say their prayers. King pleaded hard for mercy. He made all kinds of promises, and we would have liked to let the other RIC man go free. He was younger. He pleaded hard and he cried and again pleaded with us. The others would have heard the shots. So that was the reinforcements coming. They were not dead then. King could say in a scroll. They got up the parish priest, but by that time the 2 of them were dead. That's Matt Kilcawley. And this photograph was taken in Ballina during the in Ballina Castle during the Second World War. And the man here at the front, he was also involved. That's Dennis Sheeran. Okay, so I discovered this document in the British National Archives, and it's the Court of Inquiry. It was held on 2nd of July, inquiring into the deaths of Constables Thomas Higgins and Constable John King. So the Court of Inquiry was held the day following the ambush, and it was held in the barracks that the 2 RIC men had left the day before. Okay. So, witness was Sergeant Michael Healy. Okay. And he explained that he was the sergeant in charge of Dromore West Police Barracks. And he went on to explain that at 10:30 a.m. on July the 1st, Thomas Tuffy of Culleens reported here at the police barracks that 2 unknown men armed with revolvers entered his father's shop at Culleens and demanded the cash box, which contained £261, and they took it away. I at once turned out 2 sergeants and 5 constables. The 2 deceased were in front. When we got close to Culleens, we were ambushed. I did not see the 2 deceased again until their bodies were brought into the barracks last evening. The second witness was District Inspector White from Ballina, and I was very surprised to discover his name on this. For 5 weeks earlier, on the 24th of May 1921, the IRA in Ballina had made a determined effort to kill him. He was traveling just outside Ballina with his wife, and they opened fire on the car. The following morning, an 18-year-old man from Enniscrone, Thomas Howley, was shot dead by the RIC when he was trying to escape after they raided a house. He had been one of the volunteers who had tried to kill him the day before. Another witness was Dr. Henry Mark Scott, and in his testimony he describes examining the bodies and removing the bullets. So the one that I found quite moving was this one. Constable James Hoy. I produced the bullet which I found in the clothing of Constable John King when I was undressing the body. From the marks on the bullet, it had evidently passed through his body. This was about 8:30 p.m. on July the 1st, 1921. Okay, so here's a report on what happened to District Inspector White. Okay, and it tells us about Thomas Howley as well, who was mortally wounded while trying to escape. So that's Thomas Howley's headstone in Enniscrone Cemetery. He's not actually buried there, but there was a committee formed in the late 1930s, and this headstone was erected on Easter 1939, and that's him. Okay, so I would spend a lot of time looking through the military service pensions collection in the military archives. So currently there are 29 references to Culleens. So the information is continuously growing. Each time that they release another batch of pension applications, we get to see more of who was involved in the day. But to date, one of the most interesting is the one submitted by Edward Gilday from Enniscrone. He had served in the British Navy from 1913 until March 1920. He joined the IRA on his return to Sligo in April 1920, and he provided invaluable arms training to the local volunteers. So this is the application that he filled out in 1935, okay? So this is on the Military Archives website. During the conflict, as well as providing training and instruction, he states that he took part in the burning of Enniscrone Barracks and the courthouse, the attack on Enniscrone Coast Guard Station in August 1920, and an attack on an RIC patrol at Culleens in 1921, which developed into a larger fight as the IRA units retreated towards the Ox Mountains from British reinforcements. Gilday claims that he personally shot 2 of the members of the initial RIC patrol. So this is an extract of sworn evidence that he gave to the board. You were in the Culleens. What part did you take in that ambush? I don't know whether I should say it or not, but I shot the 2 policemen that were in it. You were armed, yes. What had you? A rifle. This is his death notice from 1961. So this confirms that he was involved. Now they call it the Culleens Ambush here, but it confirms that it was him, that he was involved in the ambush. Now, that wasn't the end of the killings, even though this was the 1st of July, and the first came in on the 11th. On the 6th of July, close to Culleens, there was another killing, and it was killing of Anthony Foodie. Okay, so he's an RIC man, a native of Bunnycunlin, and apparently he had been stationed in Tipperary. Okay, so this is a further extract from Mac Cawley's testimony to Ernie O'Malley. So he begins to talk about what happened to Anthony Foodie, and then he says Tom Loftus, who was captain of the guard in Leinster House, would know about this. Okay, so that was all I needed to know. Once I have a name, I can go and find information. Okay, so he says here now, this is in 1951. So he says that Anthony Foodie tried to escape, and that while escaping, he had been shot. They tied the corpse to an ass, and they put the ass out on the main road to Ballina. Okay, Now, this is the brigade activity report, and it includes the death of Anthony Foodie. It's the only incident in the brigade activity report where they don't have any names of the men involved. Okay, so when we look back at the one for Culleens, we see 70 men, but even, you know, over a decade after this killing, it was still considered to be quite controversial. So there was no names added to this. Nor I see a man named Foodie who took part in the shooting of the O'Dwyer's Party 4 IRA in question regarding this incident made a dash. Okay. So then I looked at the newspaper accounts of what happened, and this describes his body being found, and with a label stuck to his coat, "Revenge for Dwyer and the Rag." Now, so then in the British National Archives, I discovered the Court of Inquiry file into his killing. Okay, it mentions here about the label that was put on him. So one of the witnesses described what happened that evening. So he says, this is John Ruan. It was about 11:25 at night when suddenly two masked men walked in through the open door. They said, "Hands up," immediately. They came up to Sergeant Foodie and asked him if his name was Foodie, and he replied it was. They searched him and then ordered him out of the house. Okay. Where he was shot. And then we also have evidence here from Sergeant James McCarthy. He went the next morning to investigate, and he found Anthony Foodie's body on the side of the road with a label pinned to his coat. He had been shot in the back twice. And Sergeant Foodie noticed that Sergeant McCarthy noticed that Anthony Foodie's clothes were covered with the hairs of a donkey. Now, Matt Kilcawley wouldn't have known that unless somebody had, who was there, had told him. Okay, so then I looked at Thomas Loftus, his pension application. And in his own handwriting, he says that he was involved in the ambush of Black and Tans and RIC at Bonnyconlon, Eastgate, Dromore West, RIC barracks, ambush of RIC, patrol and capture of same at Culleens, County Sligo, and the shooting of Sergeant Foodie. So this is the house that Anthony Foodie was taken from, and there's somebody still living in that now today. That's Anthony Foodie, and he was the father of 5 young children when he was killed. Now, this is Thomas Loftus. This is a report of his death in the paper. So Mr. Thomas Loftus, Washington Park, Temple Oak, Dublin, died suddenly last night, aged 71, was formerly superintendent of the houses of the Oireachtas. A native of Bonnyconlon, Ballina, he joined the IRA in 1917, and in 1921 he was interned. And while in detention at the Curragh camp, he went on hunger strike for 41 days. So on his release, he went to America. And in 1933, he returned to Ireland and he joined the Guards. He became a detective sergeant attached to the special branch assigned to protection for ministers. And he was in charge of Mr. De Valera's escort to Britain in 1938 for the signing of the financial agreement which ended the economic war. That's him. So he's a man who kept many secrets, I would say. And he was also one of the men who carried out the robbery in the shop. Okay, the next man I want to look at is a man called Martin Brennan. So in his sworn statement, so they're asking him about the Culleens Ambush. So you had the best of the fight. We had the worst of it because they delayed too long. There was a running fight in the mountains until dark. Did you lose any men in the running fight? No, we did not. They pursued us right into the heart of the Ox Mountains. It was a running fight for several hours that lasted from 12 o'clock until nightfall. Okay, so in the first 70 years of the state, this is from the Dictionary of Irish Biography, Ireland censors banned 2,500 films, and between 10,000 and 11,000 more were cut. Okay. So at the outset, the censors had no background in film. Martin Brennan, the third such, appointed in 1954, had had a good war during the independence campaign, became a doctor and went into politics. In office, he banned Louis Buñuel's Los Olvidados and Lawton's Night of the Hunter, among many others. He banned Edward Dmytrik's adaptation of Graham Greene's The End of the Affair, citing theological implications which are far above the normal cinema goer's ability to grasp. He also refused to permit depictions of the Eucharist, even in newsreels. So this is one of the he banned. It's very interesting. So how appropriate. So Los Olvidados, in English, it means the forgotten. And it's about a group of juvenile delinquents living a violent, crime-filled life in Mexico, and how their morals are gradually corrupted and destroyed by the violence. It might have been a bit close to the bone for him. So Martin Brennan was also involved in the Culleens Ambush, and he felt that he had wounded Head Constable O'Hara, who had to have his leg amputated after the ambush. Martin Brennan had used a pistol that was originally used for cavalrymen for killing horses. So this is the school's project. So after the Culleens Ambush, there was the creamery was burnt in Tubbercurry, and this is one of the children writing about that. Okay, and that's Martin Brennan there. Another man who took part in the ambush was Jack Brennan. Okay, and he was the second man who went in and held up the shop. So I was one of the two people who went in to take it, and the son went in to notify the robbery. And while they were away, we handed it back to the sister. So he explains then about the, okay, so what happened? Two police were in front and they were spread out. I could not tell you. It was the last two got back. Where there many who two police were shot dead and two wounded. So I was placed near the police, where the police were to turn into the house. Okay, so Jack Brennan went on to play senior football for County Sligo and was chairman of the Sligo County Board from 1947 to 1950 and vice chairman of the Central Council of GAA. He was an umpire at the famous 1947 All-Ireland final held in New York between Cavan and Kerry, a founder member of County Sligo Races and the Tubbercurry Industrial Association. And here's a news report. Here's from him, the boat from Cove for the All-Ireland final in 1947. And that's him in the middle. So that's how he would have looked. Okay. Now, I got this from my good friend Michael Farry. So this is an extract from British Army Diary of the day, 1st of July, 1921. And in a telling line here, it tells us that the owner of the public house is arrested in connection with the affair. Okay. So the only man arrested for the Culleens Ambush was Tommy Tuffy, who reported the crime. And the RIC felt that he had been an accomplice to it. So here we have an extract from Sligo Prison on the 11th of August, 1921. There's Tommy Tuffy. I also have his release date on the 9th of December, 1921. There he is there. He died in 1959. There's nearly a whole on him. He was obviously a very popular man in the locality and very well respected. Huge amount of people wanting to say how fond of him they were. And this is his headstone in Enniscrone Cemetery. So this is the site of the ambush today. So this is what it looks like now. Okay, this is Hilltop. And this is the road beside it where the two RIC men were taken. That's Tommy Tuffy, who reported the crime to the RIC and who went to prison, an innocent man. And this photograph, I just think, is absolutely incredible. So this is the original building. This is where it happened. This is the pub and shop. Now, this is another house. You're probably wondering how this is connected to it. This is 73 Heytesbury Street in Dublin. The house is probably worth several million now. Okay, so I came across this strange story of an inquest, a Dublin inquest, of a young man, aged 23, who was found dead, shot through the heart in his lodgings. So the witness said her husband went out at about 3 o'clock and returned 6:45. He complained of a pain around his heart and lay down in the bed. The witness went to Heytesbury Street for Michael Healy, a friend, and returned with him. So this is Sergeant Michael Healy. And this is Sergeant Michael Healy's memoriam card. He died in 1957. And this was shared with me by one of his relatives who got in contact with me. That's Sergeant Michael Healy. And I think that this station is somewhere in Sligo. This photograph is, this was the RIC men who were in Eastleigh in 1921. So most of the men in this photograph would have arrived as reinforcements in the immediate aftermath of the ambush. This is Eastleigh RIC barracks as it looks today. I came across this in Guests of the Nation, and I found it quite appropriate. I alone in the crowd saw Donovan raise his Webley quietly to the back of Orkin's neck, and as he did so, I shook my eyes. He'd begun something further when Donovan pulled the trigger, and as I opened my eyes, I saw him stagger at the knees and lie out flat at Noble's feet, slowly and as quiet as a child, with the lantern light falling sadly upon his lean legs and bright farmer's boots. We all stood very still for a while, watching him settle out in the last agony. So Constable Eugene Carley was one of the RIC men who was very badly wounded. He was badly wounded in both arms when the IRA opened fire on them. So in September of 1920, he was awarded £2,000, which was a lot of money at the time. But it wouldn't buy you 2 new arms. The Jackie Clarke Collection were contacted by his grandson after my essay went on their website, and he wanted to tell me that his grandfather had moved across the border and raised a family and bought a farm with the money that he had received in compensation. In 2018, I invited Michael Farry to come and give a talk to us at the site in the pub at Hilltop, and we had an incredible evening. I couldn't believe how many people turned up, and I was even more surprised to see then, about a year later, that he'd written a poem about it. And so it's talk near the ambush site. They were anxious for truth, crammed into the function room of the Hilltop Public House. During the introductions, we heard the commotion, robbery, the high voices, the cart harnessed, the orders given, but not the quiet creep of armed men, the position taking, the rehearsal plans. While I mostly listed my achievements, my volumes of hard facts and figures, we heard the first shots, the sharp exchanges between career policemen and unsatisfied young, inspired by the long legend of resistance and recent bloating. In the room, opinions varied, and there were difficult questions. I think I handled them well, skating over the issue of the killings. But as I rambled on towards an agreed ending, We could hear the argument, the pleas, the prayers, and then the final shots. Almost make out the fall of bodies on soft turf. See the long and difficult years ahead. What could I have said? These are the barricades for the 2 RIC men. And this is the registration for deaths for John King and Thomas Higgins. I found this recently as well. This was a local lady here, a Common Law member, and she mentions the Culleens Ambush. She was up cutting turf. So on the occasion of the Culleens Ambush, she was making up turf in the bog, and she was watching the movements of the enemy who were scouring the country, and she helped men to get away by telling them of the movements she observed. So as I say, there's continuously more information coming out about it. So this is the plaque that was placed on the spot about 20 years ago. So Martin John Dolphin had been contacted by somebody from Hilltop. There was an elderly American couple who wanted to know if somebody would bring them up to the site where the 2 men had been killed. And Martin John brought them up, and I was very moved to hear the story. He said that they got out of the van and he pointed to the spot, and they knelt down at the spot and prayed, and they both cried. But they left and they came back a year later with about 15 members of their extended family, and they placed this plaque on the spot because they were frightened that they were the only members of the family who had visited the scene, and also that they wanted people to know what had happened there. So this is what the patrol would have looked like that morning when they set off from More West RIC barracks. And it's such a beautiful place. And for me, it was just such a privilege to be there that day with Martin John and to hear what he had been told about all of this. So Martin John died about 2 years after he had brought us up there, and Martin had said to me that day he was very sick, even that day that we were there. And I remember Martin Wilson saying to me that, you know, that's probably the last day that he will be up there. And I think it may well have been, but I am very grateful for him for sharing that story with me. So, I mean, the last thing I want to say is that I'm very grateful to Paddy Tuffy and Enniscrone for all his encouragement and support throughout all of my research with this. And that's it.